Hi, everybody. It's Joe Chaffee on this Sunday morning, the 6th of January, the Epiphany, the Feast of the Epiphany in Europe and in a number of the Catholic nations in Europe. This is a big day, and we are looking ahead to some interesting weather going forward. I'm going to start today with Europe because that really is right now front and center with regards to the whole pattern change that has been part of the conversation, uh, realignment, adjustment, whatever you want to call it. It has really had its biggest impact in Europe so far, and will probably continue to have a big impact on the European side. I also want to welcome those of you who are watching from the EU and also from my friends in England, in Scotland, in Ireland, as I do have a sizable audience that pops in every once in a while. And it looks like, at least initially, most of the action is to your east, but over time, that is going to be backing westward. And one of the things I just want to also point out, I know a number of you have expressed your frustration in the lack of weather information that is accessible to you. And I have to tell you quite honestly, in digging around this morning, you're trying to find satellite loops, trying to find radars and a few other things. It is just impossible. We here on the U.S. side in North America, in the United States, I mean, we have so much weather data that is out there that is provided by our government. And I don't understand. And unfortunately, because of the government shutdown, some of it is not available right now. But I don't understand it. And it's I wasn't really even aware of how little weather information you have available to you, except after you've told me. And then I went and looked at some of your government, some of your forecast websites, which basically reduce forecast down in some instances to just an icon and a couple of words, and it really doesn't tell you much of anything. So anyway, with all that being said, I'm going to spend a little bit of it spending time these last several days talking about the weather in Europe, and it's good for us to look at it because this is not an area that we normally pay attention to, clearly, and it's something new to learn. So why don't we bring up? I'm going to start with the upper air on the GFS going back a couple of days ago. This is when we had this very deep trough that was in the upper layers of the atmosphere, running from Siberia southwestward down toward Italy. Now, if you're wondering, well, okay, Joe, that's all fine and dandy. I see nice, pretty colors and I see lines. What does this all mean? All right, so let me just illustrate this for you and try to make it a bit clearer as to what all how all this functions. So you do have this deep trough, and I'm going to draw a few arrows in here so you can understand what this all means with respect to the jet stream flow. But if you just remember the fact that around lows, winds blow counterclockwise, and around highs, winds blow clockwise. We are looking at the atmosphere level of roughly 18,000 feet. And now we can figure out how the upper air winds are moving weather systems down at the surface where we live. I'm kind of making it sort of easy here. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's the basic idea. So you've got air masses that are coming in, your air over England and Ireland, for example, under this big upper high, very stable, very dry, sinking air, not much happening. But when you go back further to the east, where that trough is, you get your airflow is coming straight out of northeastern Europe and Siberia, and from the Arctic region. So that is very, very cold air that is being driven southward. The push of cold air is pretty far to the east. It is not extending back westward at this stage of the game. Back a couple of days ago, with this upper high off the coast of of England and Ireland and France. So it basically created the colder flow, and a very intense cold flow because of the nature, the depth of this trough is very strong and goes very far south into the Mediterranean. We had snows in southern Italy. We had snows in Sicily, in Palermo, in Taranto, on some of the resort beaches, waking up to a couple of inches of accumulating snow. This is very unusual. Snows down, into the Mediterranean. That doesn't happen very often. But this is as a result of this big polar vortex split that we've seen, and it's kind of coupled. You've got a couple of vortices impacting Europe and Asia, so those two vortices have sort of coupled together to bring down some colder air. So now that we have that idea in place, let's march forward and look at what models are doing here in the next several weeks, in the next couple of weeks, because this is going to be front and center. And while in some areas, by the way, it's not going to mean continuous cold, it is going to, there will be some breaks in between as cold air masses, one pulls out and the next one moves in. But as we moved through the rest this past week and headed into this weekend, that deep trough drops down into the boot heel of Italy. See, there's a cutoff low there. And then the trough swings around. And now we are at today, where you have another deep upper low. The trough actually is a little bit further east now as a result of the first trough lifting out. But we do have energy that's dropping down from Siberia on southward toward the central Mediterranean. So we've got another cutoff here. And now you've got this upper high that's sort of building, still sitting off of Ireland, England, and Scotland, and building northwestward. But that is temporary, because as we move into next week, here comes another strengthening, deepening upper trough. Now, this one is going to be a little bit further to the west than the last one is. And this comes all the way down again into the Mediterranean, particularly into Italy, down into Sardinia. And Malta, there's likely going to be another chance that there could be some very, very cold temperatures and snow in Italy and parts of Italy. I think Rome might wind up getting some snow this time around in a situation like this. Meanwhile, over England, Ireland, and Scotland, and Western France, so down into Spain and Portugal, it's still underneath that upper high. That upper high, by the way, for those of you who are back home here in the U.S., we have to pay attention to that upper high, because that has been one of the hallmarks in keeping the pattern the way it's been. There's been a lot of talk about everything that's been going on the Pacific side with this fire hose jet. Well, we also have this blocking upper high in the northeastern Atlantic here that has been there for quite a while, and it needs to get out of the way in order to get the pattern issues resolved and changing in over North America, which we have been mentioning what a slow and grinding process that is. So with this deep trough then pulling out, here comes, now we're into a week from now. This is where we start to see some movement in the upper high breaking down in the Atlantic, and a gradual shift westward in the axis of cold air. And around day 8 and 9, so this is about a week from tomorrow, you start to see a colder flow that comes down from Greenland into the North Sea. And then eventually you're going to wind up with deep troughs moving into Western Europe and into England and Ireland. So you snow lovers in England and Ireland may have to wait another 10 days or so for the pattern to start getting really cold for your area as the trough axis shifts further to the east. The models have been pretty consistent on this. So I think the confidence level of this happening is pretty, I would say, at least moderate. I always like to leave a door open for unknown changes that might show up down the road, but it seems to be the way we're going with all of this. Now, here's how it looks on the surface map in Europe, and we have a storm, by the way, coming out of the Atlantic, passing south of Greenland and Iceland, passing well north of Scotland. But that low comes inland over Norway and Sweden, and it's very strong, and it drops down into Germany and Poland, and this is going to produce some big snows here in the short term, and we're talking about probably Tuesday and Monday night, Tuesday into early Wednesday. That low does have quite a punch to it, and snows extend southward from there into Austria, Hungary. So I would think probably eastern parts of Germany, uh, uh, Poland, Austria, Hungary are going to see probably the brunt of this particular storm as it drops southward, and of course, eventually some of it winds its way down into the southern Mediterranean. The southern part of that trough, by the way, you see a low that forms in the Mediterranean Sea, south, not too far from Naples at this stage, which is Wednesday 6 a.m. London time, and then that low moves towards Greece and on up toward the Black Sea from there. So it's very, very interesting how weather systems work here. There's more snow toward the end of the week for Central Europe. And again, it's probably after about 10 days that you start to see this gradual shift westward in the colder air. You're going to have your chances in England and Ireland and Scotland at that point, and then eventually into France and probably into northern Spain and Portugal, particularly in the mountainous areas. So this is, by the way, actually going out now. We're talking on 2 weeks out into the future here. With snows back up into France and Germany and England and Scotland. And that's when you get the wind that comes down from the north over the North Sea, as has been described to me as how it works. One of these days, I'm going to take a trip out there and experience all of this, because it's a whole new climate world for me. So I hope that gives you at least a broad picture of what's going on and helps you out with your gathering and absorbing of weather information. And for those of you who are watching from overseas, if there's ever any kind of weather that you want perhaps a little bit more information on, just shoot me a message. Either post a comment on one of my videos. I'll be more than happy to address it in a subsequent live stream. I do get involved in the conversation and look at the comments and posts that go up. If I can, I certainly will jump, on the prior live stream and pay some attention to whatever issue you want to bring front and center. So let's come back home now, and we're going to take a look at our weather in my neck of the woods, which is basically eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England, and we're looking at midday temperatures at this point, which are on the mild side with some leftover mild air that is it's responding to really basically the lack of cold air from what we've had over the last couple of days. So as this storm system has pulled out to the east, and we're still waiting for colder air. And there is colder air lining up in upstate New York. You see temperatures in the low 30s and 20s as you head up toward the Canadian border, and then you get up further, it's in the teens. So the cold air is going to be generated from the north and move on in. But in the meantime, it's in the reasonable upper 40s and low 50s. And now the sun has broken through all the clouds. We had a bit of leftover cloudiness in some areas early this morning, but that has since disappeared. And here's the surface map from 7 a.m. Let's see if we got a 10 a.m. surface map, 15Z, and we do. So we do have, a couple of cold fronts to get by. First one, they're both weak. One is down in Delaware and across the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area. And then you have this secondary front that's running through upstate New York with a high that's back up north of Lake Superior. And with that, we are going to have this reinforcement of colder air that comes in for tonight and for Monday. It's actually going to get quite cold tonight in the Northeast, with temperatures down in the teens and 20s in most areas down my way, and colder than that as you go up further to the north. Meanwhile, out in the west, we are getting busy again, and we have a couple of things happening. One is, down in the southwest, we've been watching couple of days ago, if you remember, there was a system being actually watched by the Hurricane Center out in the East Pacific that wound up not developing. It just ran out of time. There wasn't a very big window of opportunity for it as it is. But the tropical moisture from that is surging northeastward, and there's still some cold air that's hanging around in the southwest. And on the surface map, you can see some temperatures in the 20s down there and low 30s. In fact, let me go back to the enhanced data display, and we can head down to the southwest U.S. and see what kind of numbers are being populated with respect to temperatures. Because certainly in the mountainous areas, like in places like Flagstaff, it's for example where it's in the upper 20s, but the temperatures are not all that warm. So you are getting tropical air coming up and getting worked through some colder air, and that's probably going to produce some heavy snows in higher elevations, and with temperatures in the 20s and below freezing through much of Utah and in through Nevada. No doubt that some areas are going to see some substantial snows. Also, as you move up the Sierra Nevada mountains in California, we have all sorts of winter storm warnings that are up for those areas. And in fact, we can bring up the Weather Service watches and warnings map, and you can see that it is fairly busy with numerous winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings up for parts of Arizona, New Mexico, western Colorado, Utah, western Wyoming, Idaho, throughout scattered around Nevada, interior, central, northern, and California, even winter storm warnings that extend up into northwestern California, not too far off the coast, and then advisories running up into Oregon and Washington. So the West continues to see very wintry conditions. And we also see various winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings up for parts of the upper Great Lakes, as we have a weather system that is moving its way through there with everything that's been going on in the east. We are going to start to focus on the weather models here and take a look at where this is all headed. Don't get too excited, by the way, over the fact that when you see sometimes the first map I have is what left over when I switched geography from the last map in the sequence. And as a result, you wind up suddenly seeing something that the model might have 10 to 15 days from now, because that's where we left off. So don't panic. So here's the situation with regards to this week coming up, and then we'll get into the upper air pattern across North America. So we do actually have this cold high that's coming in, and a quick shot of colder air into the eastern part of the U.S. Doesn't really get all the way down south very far, maybe into the northern mid-Atlantic. And now we've got this next push. And this is actually basically a giant warm front that is moving through the northern plains and up into the upper Midwest. So this is why you're seeing these winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories up through parts of northern Minnesota and through northern Wisconsin and the upper peninsula of Michigan. Now, this warm front actually weakens as it moves eastward to some degree, or at least the emphasis of the snow shifts, it remains north and west of the coastline. So I think there's the possibility that there could be a brief burst of snow or sleet Monday night into Tuesday morning that you will sleep right through, and when you wake up, it'll probably be gone because temperatures will be rising. And that's because, the warm front goes by, and now you have another system that plays through for later Tuesday with a couple of rain showers. Now, this is going to usher in another cold high, and that's coming down out of Canada. What's been happening is, we pointed this out last week, that each subsequent front and air mass, each front goes by, you get a shot of cold air. And with the way the pattern's progressing, each cold shot winds up being a little bit colder than the one before it. Now, when we're talking cold here, we're not talking, bitter cold. We're not talking anomalies of 20 to 30 degrees below normal. We're talking about air masses that are going to bring temperatures down to below average by a little bit, but not by a whole lot. Okay, that's just where we are in all of this. And from the standpoint of of typical winters, that's kind of how it works. Now, taking a look at the West, I just want to show you from what's going on today. You can see that there's the moisture that's being shown over Baja California down into Arizona and into Southern California. Again, this is all part of that tropical stream left over from that disturbance that the Hurricane Center was watching back a few days ago. And you can see the ample amounts of snow being indicated as far as the precip is concerned this morning into this afternoon and evening, and overnight and into tomorrow across California, Nevada, and points northward. That is going to be followed by another weather system uh, toward midweek with rain. But it looks like at this point, because of the fact that the trough is beginning to shift to the east and you're getting a bit more ridging to the west, you're losing some of the cold air. And in the east, meanwhile, starting Wednesday and going through the rest of the week and into next weekend, we are going to see the a colder look, and it's going to last for a bit. It's not going to just be cold for 24 hours and out. Again, we're not talking anything crazy cold, but at least it will bring it back to slightly below seasonal levels. Here's the new GFS, by the way. I was looking at the old GFS. I just want to switch to the new as we start to get a little deeper into the long range. So uh, here you've got this cold high that builds in, and toward the end of the week, you've got two things going on in two separate streams. If you watch down near Baja California and into Mexico, you start to see a little low that forms there. So there's energy in the southern part of the jet stream. And at the same time, if you look as I back it up, if you look as you move into the northern plains, you've got that patch of snow there. So there's some energy streaming down in the north. And we continue to watch these two separate streams kind of move along. The question, I think, for the next going forward with the pattern that's evolving, the big issue is going to be the fact that you're going to have these two separate streams in play, and weather models are going to have their usual difficulties in timing strengths and speeds of these short waves. And based on today's run, I can, just looking at the surface, I can tell you right now that it just, it looks like it completely obliterates the northern stream and holds together a piece in the southern stream that takes a low way out. So if you buy this idea, it winds up basically being cold and dry for much of this week, at least from Wednesday on. Remember what I said with regards to any time a pattern changes. What you want it to be and what it actually is are two different things. And you can wish cast all you want. It doesn't go, there's nothing that says that it goes from being warm and wet to cold and dry. And I think that that is a possibility given the circumstances. Does it mean that there won't be opportunities for snow? Yeah, there'll be opportunities, but as always, there's going to be that battle of where the troughs are, how do they lined up, what's the timing, et cetera, et cetera. And you're going to have models going in all sorts of directions from run to run. Now I'm going to move this forward because I'm actually looking at this for the first time, as you are. I mean, and it looks like after early next week, after this high goes out, we get a bit of a ridge here in the east. And then down the road, at least, now we're starting to get toward the 18th, 19th, and 20th. Another low goes by, a whole lot of cold air, but then you start to get into some cold air after around day 11, another shot with a bit of staying power. Now we're at January 21st, and we're at the not quite to the end of this new model run, but I think just without having really gone into this very deeply, being that I'm looking at it for the first time now, um, it just continues to say, uh, this sort of very slow grinding process to take us wherever we're going to wind up. And rather than wish cast when you look at this stuff, folks, let me just say for you weenies out there, you snow weenies out there, let me just suggest that you take a step back and really try to look at this in an unemotional way. If you see yourself as if you're young and you're watching and you see yourself maybe doing this one day, you have to really learn how to take the emotion out of the equation and your own personal biases. Otherwise, you're not going to wind up being a very good forecaster. Just to let you know, it really means kind of emptying your mind with regards to what your own personal feelings and emotions are. Because all weather people, after all, at the end of the day, are emotional, and that's just our nature. And look at these things in a very unbiased way. Now, taking a look at the upper air, starting with today, of course, we got these changes happening for Tuesday and Wednesday. We see it played through. You've got this trough diving into the northeast, and then it holds on. You get actually a little bit of a secondary push there into eastern Canada. But again, if you look at the southern stream, you have energy that comes out in the south, and the northern stream remains very flat, very suppressive, and very weak, and just kind of forces it out. So that's where the model seems to be trending on this today. Let me just emphasize that the um, the volatile nature of these model runs lately has been such that you have to be cautious, because each run seems to be timing out these things a bit differently. And then as we head a little bit deeper into the long range, next week looks like we get into a bit of a ridge here in the northeast, but there's still somewhat of a northwest flow, so it doesn't get too warm. And then a broader trough forms into the east in the longer term. I want to look at the upper air, for wide out. There are a couple of key elements that I've been focusing on the last couple of days that I think are most important. This may or may not go out far enough, but there are a few things that I'm looking for. And I think the best way to do this is to take, let's go to the North Pacific view, because this is where, if you remember my conversations and discussions from the last couple of days, the big issue has been this fire hose jet running across the Pacific. It just basically is like a ruler from Asia to the west coast of the United States. Okay, slight ups and downs, but hardly any amplitude. It just a straight line jet, and that is just basically floods the United States with moist air and warm air, at least moist air into the west, and warmer air that moves into the eastern part of the U.S. Let me just make sure you guys are seeing this okay, and you are. So we're looking to see changes here in the Pacific. And what we would, what you want to see, if you want to see winter weather in the east, you're going to want to pull that trough away from the west coast. You also are going to want to see more amplitude in the west. You want to see more ups and downs. You want to see more ridges and troughs. So you don't have this sort of straight line jet running across the Pacific. And as we move through time, you start to, here's where you get that colder shot in the east. You cut that Pacific jet off, and this is for this coming week. So if you watch from where we are in the beginning, you see how flat west to east it is across the Pacific, north of Hawaii. But then as we get into Monday and Tuesday, you start to, as I described, you start to get more amplitude. So if you get rid of that trough that's inland of the west coast, you'll notice here you've got this big wrapped up upper low that forms off of Oregon, well to the west of the Oregon coast. So you start to get an upper high that builds up to the west. That opens up a flow from Canada and brings it down into the Great Lakes and into the eastern part of the United States. That's why we have to get rid. You have to get rid of that jet across the Pacific. It remains pretty flat west to east from Asia up to about where you get to Hawaii. But because you've got that big cutoff low that has now that is forecast to be, and this is only 60 hours from now, so you've got this big upper low sitting well off the coast of Oregon that cuts that straight line flow, and you start to get a ridge that builds up into the west. Now over time, let's see what happens. You're still holding here. Now you've got more amplitude. It's not quite this overpowering jet. You can see the southern end of it has a bit of a straight trajectory, but it's into Baja California, and that is your active southern jet. You have a rather large upper air low sitting in the Gulf of Alaska, in the southern areas of the Gulf of Alaska. So you've got the room for ridging up in the up the west and into Western Canada. Now let's see what happens here. Here's where next Saturday, for example, here's where your ridge is at its strongest, up the Rockies and into the northwest, and you've got a trough in the east. But the trough axis here on the edge of the picture on the far right is along the coast. So that doesn't bode well for storms to try to come up the east coast. That would be very suppressive. Everything would get suppressed to the south. Now, let's move on. You do have, going into the week of January 14th, you do sort of have the Pacific jet there trying to get back to its sort of adversarial position. It doesn't quite make it, at least out to 264, and we're starting to see, amplitude show up again. So, at least from the standpoint of the longer haul here, the again, we seem to be heading somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where we're going to wind up in all of this, but we seem to be heading somewhere. I want to just touch base on one thing that I did notice on the European last night, and I don't know if this is going to be correct or not. I have to tell you, quite honestly, I haven't had a whole lot of confidence when it has come to the European model in general lately. But I'm just looking here at some of the temperature anomalies that are being shown. The European wants to bring down a sharp east-west trough here next weekend. And it would suggest that we could have a brief shot of very cold air coming down from eastern Canada into the northeast and into the northern and mid-Atlantic states. I I see how it happens. This is actually an upper trough, an east-west trough. If you look here, it's that upper low in eastern Canada that drops southward, and you've got this trough that swings through. That once it goes by, that cold air is going to move out because a ridge pops back up behind it. But it does give a brief shot of very cold air coming in for a short period next weekend. That's it. As far as that goes, the GFS certainly gives you the idea that whatever's going to happen next week, and by later next week, is not. It's not particularly bullish on it. The European last night was also not especially bullish on it either. But we'll keep an open mind on where this is all going when we look at the models later this afternoon. Let me just mention for my Patreon folks that are on tonight, this morning, I'm sorry, because we are now at noon time, noon Eastern time here in the U.S. For my Patreon folks that are on today, I'm going to attempt to do things in reverse with respect to this is the YouTube live stream that everybody's seeing, and probably sometime tonight I will jump on and do a quick live stream for Patreon members only. And if you are wondering what that is, I have a subscription platform on Patreon, and it is just $2 a month. I'll put the link up there for those of you who are interested. There's also a link on the descriptor to this live stream and the descriptor to this video. It's a great way to support my channel, and you get tons of weather with this. You get posts from me on and off all day long. Some of those posts are on my website. Some of those are not. You get live streams just for Patreon members. And it's nice because it's a small group of people get together and partake into the conversation. And there's not a whole lot of when there's a big crowd, sometimes it can be a bit distracting, and I can't get to everybody's questions and comments. This way I can, and you can message me. When I'm not doing a live stream, you can just shoot me a message. So again, it's just $2 a month, and it goes a long way. It gets me a couple of cigars along the way, and I'm a happy camper. So do consider that. And as I said, for Patreon members tonight, we'll do a private live stream for members only. So, good morning to everybody that is on. It's nice to see a pretty good midday crowd at this time of the day on a Sunday. Um, don't be shocked, says Shelly Man Studios, if we see spring-like temperatures at some point in February. We got it in 17, we got it in 18. And you know what? In most years, you do get maybe one push in February where it warms up in between weather systems. That's just natural, especially since you start you're starting to see the lengthening daylight and the impact of the slightly stronger sun. But that wouldn't be anything highly unusual. As warm as last February was, because it was in many areas in the east on the extreme, and we sometimes have a habit of redoing the exact opposite in the subsequent year. Don't be surprised if February winds up being, very cold for a good stretch of the month. So expect everything and enjoy everything as it comes along. Okay, any major blockbuster storms for New England? Asks Willie the weather guy. I would say, no. These weather systems that are coming through for tomorrow and for Tuesday are going to have their biggest snow impacts well up into upstate New York and northern Vermont, New Hampshire, and into Maine. Robert, as far as South Florida is concerned, I would say, if the trough is going to be in the east toward the end of the week, you're going to have some cold flow down into Florida. Now, how far south it gets, I would think that it would probably clear a front all the way through. You probably will see some cooler weather coming down into Florida next weekend if we're going to have this trough in the east. I think that would make total sense. Michael Dunn. Greetings from Ireland. I appreciate you being here. Thank you. I always get a kick out of seeing folks on from Ireland and England and Scotland. We had a number of them last year when we were dealing with the beast of the East that impacted the Siberian air mass that moved into England and Ireland and Western Europe late last February, while we were that was all part of another big split in the polar vortex up in the stratosphere. So uh, it certainly did have a big impact last year, both there and here. Um, when it is cold in Europe, heating oil prices tend to go up because of demand. So do nat gas prices also tend to be pressured. Although I did happen to notice after not watching, it seems like nat gas had this big rally during the fall where it doubled in price, almost, well, not quite doubled in price, but it almost did. And now it's sort of given it all back. And November of 81, it snowed in San Antonio for the first time in 22 years. And then I went to Germany in 84. It snowed, and on the Mosel River, it froze for the first time in 22 years. Okay, so Mike, are you saying that wherever you go, the cold follows? Because I think if that were the case, you probably would have a number of snow lovers if it really worked to bring you up into the Northeast and bring the cold and snow into this area. Um, Every 20 years, Europe and Northern Africa experience extreme cold temperatures and hot temperatures. Has nothing to do with it. Well, there is some truth, and Mike, what you're saying, you get these cyclical events. One of the things, by the way, and this is actually you kind of reminded me of about some stuff I was thinking about the other day with regards to this. Um, One of the big issues that I have with the way news and weather information is disseminated now, and I think it's one of the biggest problems that we've had with regards to, you've got these people, you've got folks on, some of these enthusiasts that just, um, you know, basically want to hype up everything, and nothing is given any kind of context. It almost seems as if everything is happening now that it's never happened before. I'm amazed at some of the comments that people make with regards to their rather faulty memories. I can tell you, having worked in this, and you know, having a pretty good head for how weather, at least in my neck of the woods, has occurred over the last 20 years. Some stuff has remained the same. Some stuff has changed. I don't know how much of it is cyclical. I don't know how much of it is in terms of a secular long-term change. That's kind of not where my head is at, because I'm not in there crunching all the data and looking at the atmosphere in the context of a broad 102 year, 100 or 200 year perspective. Okay, I'm about tomorrow, the next day, and the next week. Okay, maybe the next 2 weeks, but that's about it. But uh, I am amazed at how many people think that winters in the past means that it snows every waking minute and it's freezing every waking minute. It's never worked that way. Also, please bear in mind, I had a couple of people comment that it's snowing in Mexico. Oh my, it's snowing in Mexico. Well, guess what? It has snowed in northern Mexico. It snows there almost every winter. It's a very mountainous terrain there. They have elevation, and under certain circumstances, particularly when you have upper lows that cut off south toward Baja California or off the Southern California coast, you get energy that moves through. And if the trough is in the west, like kind of what we saw last week, yeah, it does snow in the mountains of Mexico. That is not something that just suddenly started happening. Okay, I worked in South Texas in 1982. In the 1970s, 80s, and 90s in particular, in that 30-year time frame, the winters in the West, okay, the winters in the western half of the United States, for the most part, were far more active than they were in the East. And we would have situations where you would have, with the deep troughs out in the West, where all this cold air would drain down through Texas and go down from the Great Plains down through Texas and into Mexico. It snows there all the time. There's nothing new there. Okay, it snows in the Mediterranean, along the Mediterranean in Italy and in southern Italy and in Sicily. Doesn't happen every year. Doesn't even happen every other year, but every once in a while you get patterns that bring snow pretty far to the south. Okay, it happened 100 years ago, and it's happening now. So please, uh, when you make comments that doesn't have any data support behind it, it's all coming from emotion, and uh, there's no there's no value to that. You're just, you're just kind of throwing a temper tantrum. Just like I talk about how these snow weenies that throw temper tantrums on a regular basis because they're not getting snow every single minute of every day, starting from the beginning of November to the beginning of May, because it just doesn't work that way. And then they throw temper tantrums, screaming at weather people who are trying to just do their job and describe what weather patterns are going forward. And they're yelling at them out of so, but it doesn't do you any good. It's not my doing. Okay, and I'm trying to just give a very objective view about what's going forward. That's what I'll always try to do. But look, bottom line is, just try to remember that your world where you live in, when you make these observations about what the weather is going on in your particular area and in your particular neck of the woods, uh, doesn't mean that it's not happening someplace else for somebody else. If it's not happening in the East, it's likely happening in the West. If it's not happening in the West, then it's likely happening in the East. This is just the way the weather world works. It's never happening everywhere at the same time. There are times when it's happening over a large area of geography as part of the same weather pattern, but the weather pattern that would produce snow in Los Angeles is not the same weather pattern that would produce snow in Savannah, Georgia. Okay, I guess that's the best way to look at it. It's just it's different. You've got it's a matter of where the highs and lows are, the ridges and troughs, and and that's it. That's really what it boils down to. And some years it's in your favor. Sometimes you can have patterns that last over a series of years, but you are also going to have years where it's not in your favor and things are subpar. Um, and that's it. So I think we're going to leave it at that, folks. Not too bad for a Sunday. It's noontime. The weather's turning nice here in the east. The winds are starting to gust around too. So anyway, Patreon members, you get your get a live stream probably sometime later this evening or tonight. And after that, this coming week, it's a normal week. So that means YouTube live streams probably at 7 o'clock Eastern time. The Joe and Joe show. I just recalled there are a couple of hiccups this week, but we'll deal with that as we go along. But the general idea this week is usually 7 o'clock live streams. The Joe and Joe weather show on Facebook, and then uploaded later to YouTube will be on at roughly 9:20 Eastern time, every day next week. We are going to attempt to get Dr. Judah Cohen on to talk about explain the whole concept of what's going on in the stratosphere and how it does or doesn't impact the weather down here on at the ground where we live. And we're going to try to shoot for either Tuesday or Wednesday. I'll have to get in touch with him to kind of set up a date and time. So we're looking at the Tuesday and Wednesday as possibilities this week if it works out for his schedule. So I'll let you know about that as well. And that's it. So just look for website posts on meteorologistjoechaffee.com. I've written extensively about the long range and weather in Europe there. So for those of you who want more information, just go to meteorologistjoechaffee.com and you can access that off of my website. For those of you who are in the New York, New Jersey, Long Island, Connecticut, Hudson Valley area, and you've got an Android device, you can look at all this stuff on my free weather app. And here is the link to that. And you can download it. Again, that's free. I still don't have an iPhone version of it. That is a waiting for Apple. It seems like I'm forever waiting for Apple, but that's the reality. And also, those of you who again are interested, if you want to expand your weather experience with more weather most of the time, because I do sleep, and videos just for you, and also you can message me at any time if you've got any questions or comments. You can take a look at my platform on Patreon and subscribe to it. It's just $2 a month, and that goes a long way. As I said, I'm a happy guy. If I can get a few cigars out of the deal, life is good, and I appreciate it greatly. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks again for being here, and we'll see you either later if you're a Patreon member or tomorrow back on the regular YouTube schedule.